Hello everyone, Happy New Year! I am back after a long hiatus and I want to talk about something interesting today. Diphenhydramine, one of the most commonly used allergy medications and one of the most bizarre hallucinogens with its own supernatural mascot, the Hatman. So today I'm going to share two interesting first-hand stories of diphenhydramine trips, talk about why and how it's different from other hallucinogens like LSD or mushrooms, and then talk about what really made me want to make this video, the Hatman. There's not really going to be much on screen for this video, it's more of just listening, so if you guys want to just do some work, play some video games, just enjoy yourself and just listen to this in the background while we go over some crazy first-hand stories. Thank you all for the support recently. I've been gone for 4 months and you guys have still gotten me more and more subscribers. I think I'm over 6,300 at this point. Thank you so much. It's honestly insane that I'm still getting support when I haven't done anything to deserve it, so thank you all. And yeah, let's get into the stories. You might be aware of something called the 700 Club, which refers to taking a trip from a 700 plus milligram dose of DPH. Last night was my first time tripping with DPH, so I decided to aim for that benchmark. About 18 hours later, I can confidently say that this is not a club to be envious of. I've read trip reports of DPH in the past, which led me to believe that DPH is more fearsome than heroin or meth. I now know why. I decided to try it for scientific study despite my imagined fears. Basically, I wanted to find the intersection point of body and spirit. I found the consistency between trip reports to be more than coincidence, and this led me to believe that users were interacting with some real astral plane where shadow people reside. I believed it was necessary to trip to find where in the mind these worlds collide. 15 minutes before the trip, 6:45 p.m. Central Time, I measured out 28 DPH tablets at 25 mg each for a total of 700 mg. After a few moments, I decided to add an extra tablet to ensure a 700 mg minimum, bringing my total to 29 pills and 725 mg. 10 minutes before dosage. I spent some time taking measures to make sure my environment was safe since I tripped alone and had no sitter to monitor my IRL state, which I refer to as the carnal plane. This preparation involved using masking tape to seal off access to my power tools, my kitchen knives, and my stove burner knobs. I also placed masking tape on my apartment door handle to deter me from leaving and endangering myself. Then I armed myself with a flashlight and a laser pointer to help determine if something was carnal or astral, IRL or imagined if you prefer. I began dosing myself 4 pills, 100 mg, at a time. The current time was 7 p.m. 10 minutes after dosage. I completed consuming all the pills. During the process, I noticed that I was strangely calm and determined. Having a goal tremendously helped overcome any anticipated fears. I estimated I had no more than an hour before symptoms appeared, so I took the opportunity to continue organizing and baby-proofing my apartment. 20 minutes after dosage. I noticed gurgling in my stomach similar to hunger pains, however these had no pain to them, so I wondered if I was experiencing indigestion. I had little to eat beforehand, so I ate some crackers to see if they would alleviate the gurgling. I noticed no further gurgling, so that may have helped. 25 minutes after dosage, I finished my packet of crackers. 30 minutes after dosage, I heard my neighbor banging something loudly. I assured myself it was too soon after dosing for this to be a hallucination, but I did feel some concern that it would provoke future hallucinations. I decided it was in my best interest not to investigate this noise or any further sounds, especially if it involved going outside. I noticed that my eye focus depth was drifting out to infinity, much like what would happen to someone who was daydreaming or zoning out. I also felt tingling on the hairs of my right arm just over my radius. This tingling felt like goosebumps, but I do not recall my arm hair being extended. 35 minutes after dosage. It became difficult to continue writing notes. I started experiencing intensifying double vision, so I had to close one eye in order to see what I was writing. Around this time, I sensed arm hair tingling in the same location on my other arm. I noticed a decline in my ability to concentrate. I was limited in paper, so I wanted to record only the most essential of notes. Unfortunately, my train of thought began derailing faster than I could record. 40 minutes after dosage. I thought it might be useful to set up my phone as a surveillance camera since I was quickly losing the ability to record notes manually. Using one eye to write became difficult and using both eyes was impossible. At this point in my paper notes, my handwriting is much more erratic than when I started. Around this time, I began experiencing the typical side effect of dry mouth. My motor skills were declining and my legs became weak and shaky. I could no longer walk around without using my hands to stabilize myself against a wall or a table. I have no written records after this point, so the following notes are approximate and to the best of my memory. 45 minutes after dosage. I went to retrieve my phone to record video, but I instead sat on my bed and tried to orient myself. A sense of intoxication was strong at this point, and it was continuing to grow. My body was becoming increasingly fatigued, and I had difficulty maintaining my posture. This fatigue matched what others have said about their body parts feeling heavy. Knowing that my body almost certainly didn't change in weight, I theorized that my peripheral nervous system was becoming unresponsive. This idea was supported by the extra effort I had to put into moving my limbs. The sensation was very similar to the feeling of trying to run while underwater or while in a dream. 1 hour after dosage. I sat upright on my bed for some time with nervousness increasing and my palms becoming sweaty. I felt compelled to lay down on my bed, which I was reluctant to do out of fear of imminent spiders. I don't think I was hallucinating at this point, but my vision was distorted and fine details were smeared as if they were in a heat mirage, hence the inability to write notes. I eventually did lay down on my bed and I felt an immense sense of relief from trying to carry my own body. Had there not been an increasing sense of dread, I would have found this to be quite pleasant. An hour and 15 minutes after dosage. A feeling of cotton mouth escalated from annoying to near painful, especially when trying to swallow. I decided I needed to get a bottle of water from the kitchen, so I reluctantly sat upright and began mustering up my strength to operate my own limbs. I think it was around this point that I began having visual hallucinations. On a side note, I sometimes wear black socks, which can leave little balls of black lint on my carpet. Normally, I would walk right over them and think nothing of it. At this moment, however, my low visual sharpness and waving vision made these black specks look as if they were moving. Even worse, it looked like they were moving towards me. I'm pretty sure this is when I saw my first spider. An hour and 30 after dosage. I eventually dodged the pea-sized spiders wandering on my bedroom carpet and made my way to the fridge. I took out a water bottle and had a sip, and my cotton mouth felt significantly better. I later learned that this relief was only for a little while, so I proceeded to have a water bottle within arm's reach at all times. While in the kitchen, I heard what sounded like murmuring from a conversation outside. It's plausible that it actually was my neighbors, but I overrode my desire to find out. I preferred to remain ignorant instead of looking outside and seeing the Hatman or some other entity. An hour and 45 minutes after dosage. I didn't know what to do with myself. Most of my interests require thought and concentration, hence the power tools, and I had few options that I could choose in my current state. I reluctantly decided to go take a shower and get ready for bed. I think I was nodding off at this point. 2 hours after dosage. I had most of the lights on in my apartment since I was not interested in scaring myself. This helped in some ways, in others it made my hallucinations even more convincing. If I thought my bedroom was infested, then my bathroom was way worse. I opened the bathroom door and turned the light on. Immediately, I see small specks all over the tile floor. They were smaller than the spiders I saw before, so I squatted down to take a closer look. As soon as I tried to focus on one speck, it would disappear right before my eyes. This horrified me. My experience has shown me that only one creature looks and moves like this, a flea. There were 1 or 2 dozen specks all over the floor, and I was terrified with the idea of getting undressed in a bathroom infested with fleas. I should note that I'm a bit of a germaphobe, and I don't recall spiders ever transmitting bubonic plague. 2 hours and 15 minutes after dosage. I spent a good amount of time wadding up toilet paper and squishing fleas. I filled my toilet bowl at least once with wadded up toilet paper. I thought I was making good progress, but some of the fleas were too quick to be grabbed. I resigned and got into the shower. Around this time, I saw small red specks which I interpreted as spider mites. For personal reasons, I have a strong dislike of spider mites as well. A gardener will understand what I mean. 2 hours and 30 minutes after dosage. I imagine I was in the shower for quite some time because I felt safe there. Even though there were fleas and spider mites crawling around the tub, I could fight back by removing the shower head and spraying them with water. I washed away at least 5 or 10 insects with this method. I eventually got out of the shower. My hallucinations seemed to be subsiding, but the fleas were still real enough that I hopped over them while leaving the bathroom. I think it was around this point that I noticed my hands and forearms were red and inflamed, as if I was having some histamine reaction. My hands were shaking and my dexterity felt reduced. On a positive note, my heart rate had calmed down even though I was still slightly above resting rate. As I write this 19 hours later, my hands and forearms have mostly returned to their typical skin tone, hand tremors have disappeared. 3 hours after dosage. I retrieved more water bottles and headed to bed. Hallucinations had mostly stopped at this point, although I might have still been hearing auditions. I scanned my bathroom carpet with my flashlight for spiders, but none were found. Unsure if there were any unseen fleas, I tiptoed to my bed and climbed in. Once there, I fought the temptation to start thinking about bedbugs. I heard more whispering and noises outside of my bedroom window. Once again, I declined to investigate. Having my bedroom completely dark wasn't bad at this point. I didn't suddenly see any shadow people like I thought I would. I had trouble getting to sleep because my legs were restless. Every few minutes, I felt like I needed to stretch them or shake them, and it interrupted my attempts to fall asleep. I succeeded at some point and woke up the next morning with no memory of any dreams that I may have had. As awful as it was, I think the trip turned out pretty well even if I didn't accomplish my original goal. I noticed odd placements of things the next morning. I must have done at some point for some reason. I don't remember entirely what happened, but I'm confident and relieved about what didn't happen. I found my masking tape seals as I left them, so I wasn't in danger of cutting myself or running into traffic. I'm still having fleeting glances of light enter my field of view 20 hours later, but I think it's diminishing. It probably isn't HPPD, but if it is, then it's still better than what I experienced last night. Current medications: 300mg Wellbutrin, 30mg Adderall XR. Previous recreational drug experience: marijuana, salvia, mushrooms, MDMA, MDA, LSD, LSA, painkillers, downers, DXM, Benadryl, uppers, Ambien. At that time, I thought that my previous recreational Benadryl use had given me enough experience to be able to comfortably deal with deliriums. It did not come close to preparing me for this. Said. I was tired from the day, but still slightly amped from the Adderall that I had taken a little after noon. In the previous week or so, I had been having bizarre and very disturbing dreams that I believe reflected my general frustration with the fact that my life had not been going as planned. I was very depressed and had recently dropped out of college after my first semester, despite a 3.9 GPA. A few months prior to this experience, I had been hospitalized for an amphetamine overdose. In retrospect, I'm not sure if it was entirely accidental. Setting: Thursday night around 11 o'clock, my room in the suburbs of an insulated northeastern college bubble town. Note: chronology is an estimate. I wanted to go to sleep, but could not because of the Adderall. I decided to take one of my mom's Ambien to help me get to sleep. 11 o'clock, ingested one 10mg Ambien pill. I sat at my computer in my room and read articles from Wikipedia, waiting for the effects to come on. I don't know why I did not go to bed. Maybe I already knew what I was going to do. After a few minutes, a kid I met at school before I dropped out IM'd me and we started conversing. 11:20. I began to feel mildly sedated. I noticed that typing required more effort and thought. Instead of being able to rely on muscle memory, I had to consistently tell my fingers which keys to push, and I had a little trouble following the conversation. 11:30. I was definitely feeling heavily sedated. I started feeling slightly dissociated, almost like a very low level DXM trip with fewer visual distortions. I thought to myself that I would probably go to bed soon. I also experienced a little numbness and even forgot that I was holding a cup of water a few times. I looked up from typing for a second, and as I did, I realized the depth perception and perspective in general seemed a little off. Nothing major, it just seemed a bit like the lines of perspective did not all go to the same vanishing point like in a Picasso, but to a much lesser degree. It's at this point that I decided that I didn't really feel like going to sleep. I decided to experiment a bit. Famous last words. Valerian. I'd used it before in combination with melatonin and vitamin B6 for dream potentiation, and remembered it being very mildly psychedelic and giving faint tracers, especially in darkness. I also remembered that I'd still had some valerian root extract left over from my investigations. Perfect. I went to my medicine cabinet and got 5 450mg capsules out. 11:30, ingested 5 450mg capsules of valerian root extract. While in my bathroom, I noticed a bottle of generic Diphenhydramine HCI. I had used Benadryl recreationally in the past on numerous occasions, and I remembered strange delirium-like hallucinations with higher doses. What the hell, I thought. I'm already abusing 2 non-traditional last resort drugs. I was feeling like a crackhead anyway, so I just did it. I already had a bit of tolerance from recently abusing Benadryl, but I knew I was about to feel the valerian, so I only took 100mg. 11:30, ingested 4 25mg pills Diphenhydramine HCI. I walked back to my room, now feeling nervous. I lay down on my bed and waited. I knew quite a bit about pharmacology, chemistry, psychology, and cognitive science. While at home, I had been taking several classes at a nearby university, including a graduate-level human cognition class, and I knew myself, so I suspected that some very uncomfortable feelings would come up during this trip. After a few minutes of lying there waiting, out of some weird subconscious masochist need, I decided then and there that tonight was going to be intense. terrifying but intense. I got up and resolutely walked to the bathroom to get more drugs. As I looked into the dark room, I saw an apparition hovering in the darkness in the instant before I turned on the light. It looked like a thick translucent cloud in the shape of a rippling curtain, and it was very similar in texture and color to the grayish blue lights you see when you apply pressure to your own closed eyes. I took one more Ambien, 4 more Benadryl, and grabbed the bottles of Benadryl and Valerian to bring back to my room now. I was now feeling moderately inebriated, though still coordinated enough to have no trouble walking back. 11:40 ingested 1 10mg pill Ambien, 4 25mg pills Diphenhydramine HCI. I lay down on my bed and turned off the lights. I could faintly make out the outlines of my room in the dim light coming in under my door and through my window. Almost immediately I noticed the same cloudy mist. This time it was taking up my entire field of vision, though not obscuring it. For the rest of the night, this mist covered everything and gave it an unreal, dreamy quality. The mist quickly grew thicker and I could see it flowing in currents and patterns almost like a grayish-green ethereal aurora borealis, except with very different kinds of patterns, and moving much more quickly in a very jerky, rough way. This jerky quality of the mist made it look as if everything was in a film played at a low frame rate, an effect that characterized the entire experience. The mist would concentrate itself in the center of my vision, and when I looked at the dim outline of my swivel chair, it interacted with the chair, circling around it in a current that eventually formed a cone around the column of the chair. I noticed spindly, almost crystalline-like structures branching off the upper parts of the chair. When I closed my eyes, I noticed a very vivid residual image of my room. As the night wore on, the open-eyed image would eventually become so ethereal and the closed-eyed one so vivid as to render them virtually indistinguishable. The entire time in my room, I had been growing steadily more dissociated, so that by this point I was roughly at the same level of a higher second plateau DXM trip. I turned on the lights and looked around. Everything seemed basically normal, just a bit off perspective with a dreamlike unreal quality and the low frame rate effect, all of which seemed to be induced by the mist. I looked at my wall and happened to notice that the clockwork orange poster showing the silhouette of Alex and his friends walking towards you looked exactly like a hologram. It was three-dimensional, had green and orange tinges, and the figures strutted back and forth as I moved my head back and forth. I looked at my other poster with similar results. When I looked back, however, the outlines of the figures in the clockwork orange poster were vibrating at a high frequency. The vibrations were subtle at first, but very soon the variation became so large that the characters seemed fuzzy and slightly foggy, much like the room. After this point, I have no linear concept of memory. The following I remember in small, disconnected dream portions. In fact, I thought that all of this was a bad dream until I spoke to my dad the next day. With traditional psychedelics like acid and mushrooms, I get visuals, but they are always, or almost always, clearly just visual distortions. They are not real. They are not fully formed or defined. They do not sit with me in my kitchen and carry out a coherent conversation with me. With these, it was different. Everything seemed dreamlike, so a dreamlike figure seemed just as real as anything else. With no reality-based frame of reference, it became impossible to distinguish between these true hallucinations and reality, so I passed out of this world into a state of delirium. After the intensity of the vibrating started to increase, it came to a point where the figures seemed to be vibrating so much that they now had the ability to move independently of the poster. I remember seeing the figures step out of the poster and into my room. They looked completely solid. Real, but at the same time not at all. Almost as if they were copies of people. I could sense they were not human by the shadowy texture and color and by the way they moved. They did not walk or even really move at all. Rather, it was as if I was watching a series of still frames in sequence. They would jerkily step around and often appear somewhere else without warning. I remember hearing voices in my head. Some of them whispered, some of them cried, some of them screamed. I do not remember what they said, only that it made me feel sad and terrified. The figures from the poster were no longer in my room, but when I turned, I saw a gray man sitting on my desk. I then remember the voices swelling to an overwhelming roar, and I honestly thought that I was going insane and that my personality was splitting into several distinct parts, each with its own voice, each yelling to be heard above the rest. For some reason, I desperately cried out, "How many of you are there?" At which point they answered collectively, "We are 4. We are each you." They then proceeded to run through a list of forgotten actions from my early childhood, every mean thing that I had ever been ashamed of doing. Each time they listed an action, one of the 4 would come forward as if to say, "When you did that, that was me. I was the part of you that did that awful thing." The next thing I remember, I was walking into my kitchen. As I stepped in, my older brother stepped out of a shadowy corner. I was happy to see him. My brother does not live at home and I was excited that he was back. We started talking and eventually I decided to walk out of the kitchen and back towards my room for some reason. I remember turning to say goodnight, and as I looked back at him, I paused. Something was not right. He was expressionless and silent. He looked strange, almost two-dimensional, and he would only move when I moved. When I stepped toward him, he seemed to rock back on hinges and move behind the doorway into the shadows. When I stepped back, he would rock back into place and appear to be normal. I spent a few seconds repeatedly stepping back and forth and watching him swing like some demonic cardboard cutout. Disconcerted, I turned around to go to my room, only to find him silently leaning against the wall next to me, staring blankly at me. I walked around the house trying to get away from this strange, lifeless, shadowy incarnation of my brother, but every time I turned, there he would be, leaning stiffly and unmoving, staring blankly. "Why are you doing this?" I asked him. "You're not even real, go away," I yelled. But at this point, I ran into my dad, who apparently was real and had been woken by my screaming at the air at 3 a.m. Fortunately, he thought I was sleepwalking and having a nightmare and told me to go back to sleep. For a few blessed seconds after meeting my dad, I had returned to reality, albeit a very confused and very sedated reality. But as soon as my dad walked out of sight, I immediately slipped back into the dream world again. The next thing I remember was I was trying to walk back to my parents' room, possibly to get help, when en route I saw a procession of shadowy figures coming out of the closet that sits by the entrance to their room. The only one I remember looked vaguely like an East Indian acquaintance of mine. "What the fuck are you doing in my parents' closet at 3 in the morning?" I asked him. He did not answer. Instead, he raised his right hand as if in a greeting and began to flail and jerk it back and forth very quickly while wearing the same blank expression I had seen on my brother's face. His right arm did not move in a natural way at all. Rather, it flopped around as if all the bones in it had been shattered by the force of his flailing. Of all the things I saw that night, the two images I will never forget are those of that horrible, unnatural flailing, and the one of my brother's lifeless, two-dimensional body rocking back and forth in reaction to my movements. When I woke up the next morning, I was still getting residual images when I closed my eyes, though to a much lesser degree than the night before. I also had a horrible headache that lasted the entire day. This was extremely painful, and a bad e-crash has nothing on it. Finally, around 5 the next day, I decided to smoke some weed, partially because people were smoking me out, and partially because I wanted to get rid of the pain. Even though the weed was nothing special, some okay hydro, the high was very strong and very strange. I started perceiving things in a low frame rate again, felt very disoriented and even numb a few times. The day after I had a slight headache but nothing too bad, and that night I saw a fainter version of that mist again as I was trying to sleep. This was without a doubt the most terrifying experience of my life, and I am now afraid of the dark. So why does Benadryl cause vivid hallucinations? Diphenhydramine is an antihistamine drug that stops histamine from being released from your body. Histamine is a chemical that helps the immune system fight invasive pathogens and basically intruders to your body, but sometimes it fights things that aren't harmful like pollen, animal hair, depending on the person, and this is what happens when you have allergies. Your immune system just freaks out over nothing. And by doing so, it tries to get it out of your body as soon as possible, which is why sneezing, coughing, crying, and in extreme cases, your body may try to isolate the area of infection, causing swelling, which can be life-threatening for some people like me. Now, while all antihistamines try and block your body's production of histamine, diphenhydramine is one of, if not the only, antihistamine medicine that breaks through the blood-brain barrier. So while other medications stop histamine in your body, diphenhydramine blocks it in your brain. It does this by blocking the hypothalamus, which links your nervous system and endocrine system through the pituitary gland, and through hormones, the hypothalamus controls body temperature, hunger, thirst, fatigue, and sleep. Diphenhydramine blocks histamine going through the hypothalamus to the cerebral cortex, which is the main part of your brain that allows you to do things like moving your body, thinking, processing, and reacting to information, and feeling emotions. The cerebral cortex is essentially what makes you you. It made you want to click this video, it makes you move your body, it makes you feel all the emotions you feel, it makes you process emotions. It is essentially the most important part of your brain. So why is histamine, something that's involved in the immune system, important for the cerebral cortex? Well, histamine is very different in the brain than it is the body. In the brain, histamine is used to regulate body temperature, regulate emotion, mood, give you a feeling of awakeness and alertness, and is important for sensory perception. So that's why you feel tired and drowsy after taking Benadryl. It's because you don't have that histamine to give you the feeling of being awake. And then in higher doses, it causes you to hallucinate in a dream-like sense because your brain basically thinks that it is asleep. And it kind of puts into question, why do we sleep? I mean, there are tons of theories as to why we do it, but nothing's ever really been concrete. There's been theories about it just being a random firing of neurons, and there's other things about it's your brain making sure it's still alive in some way, but no one really knows why we dream. There's also a bit of misconception with hallucinations in general. Some people believe that hallucinations are an overstimulation of the cortex. However, it's actually the same amount of information being taken in, it's just that you cannot process that information correctly. So during these stories, people are seeing their actual rooms and environments correctly. However, their cortex is just telling them the wrong information, making them see things that aren't there. Which is really crazy to think about, that a little part of your brain doesn't understand what it's looking at, so it makes stuff up. So while other drugs like LSD and mushrooms have that same hallucination effect, they don't feel as real as diphenhydramine effects because your body doesn't have a base sense of reality to stabilize you. And a little fun fact about antihistamines and histamine in general, apparently antihistamines are being tested to have a possible relation to dementia, since it is a chemical that affects your brain's comprehension and sometimes memory. But so far nothing concrete has come out about that. It's more so just if you take antihistamines in high doses, you do tend to forget more. However, it is advised that elderly people do not take diphenhydramine and other antihistamines. Also, histamine imbalances in the brain is also common among schizophrenics. Who would have thought? People with the chemical that keeps them awake, alert, and processes information that doesn't work correctly, hear and see things that aren't real. Crazy. Now, let's get into the real reason everyone clicked on this video, the Hatman. Now, I've known about the Hatman for a very long time. I think a lot of people who spend a lot of time on the darker side of the internet with the whole creepypastas and cryptids and all that are familiar with them. For those that don't know, the Hatman is an entity that has been commonly reported among people taking high doses of diphenhydramine and has kind of sparked a Benadryl challenge in a way. It's not actually a challenge, but essentially if you take a certain amount of tablets or milligrams, you will eventually see him. Some people do, some people don't. It's just a funny thing people joke about a shadow man in a hat that appears to you when you're tripping with a very dangerous chemical. Now, doing some research, I found that the Hatman, although heavily linked to Benadryl, is not exclusive to diphenhydramine. I found an entire subreddit about people sharing stories. Some say he appears after traumatic events, some say he appears after other drug usages, other times he appears just completely out of the blue, which it's crazy to think there's an entire subreddit of people who have soberly seen the Hatman on a regular basis, and it's just this kind of schizophrenic circle of like self-affirming. Because some person is just like, yeah, I see the shadow guy constantly. And then someone else goes, yeah, I also see shadow people too. And then it just keeps going with people sharing stories of them seeing shadow people. And it's like, I feel bad about it because this isn't like a Benadryl trip. It's not a hallucination. These are people that just see shadow people, like actual schizophrenic symptoms. And I feel kind of bad for it, but regardless, essentially, the Shadow Man blew up as a joke with Benadryl. There's a lot of memes about it, and some people have taken a lot of Benadryl at a time trying to see him, which is not good because there are severe side effects that are long-lasting after taking high doses of diphenhydramine. There's a lot of speculation as to what the Hatman is. Some think he's an evil entity, some think he's just an observer, some people claim to have spoken to him and have conversations. While doing some research, I found a movie based off of the Hatman and like stories people have told about him, and it looks hilarious. I need to watch this movie. I'm probably going to after I upload this video. It looks so funny. I will, if I do, I will leave an update in the comments on how it went. But overall, it is just kind of a cryptid side of internet meme. Just a shadow entity that's become popular and familiarized and has sort of made a name for itself. In the end, it is just a hallucination. I tried finding stories that I could read with the other two about Hatman. However, a lot of them read more like creepypastas, and I couldn't verify the validity of them. It just seemed a lot more of fiction rather than anything grounded. Which, don't get me wrong, suspension of disbelief is definitely important when it comes to things like cryptids and supernatural, which I'm all for. However, there does need a base ground line stepping stone. You know, are skinwalkers really out there in the woods? Probably not. Is it possible that some of the disappearances aren't just people getting lost? Absolutely. It's that suspension of disbelief that really a lot of these Hatman stories aren't able to do. They just sound too over the top. However, it was pretty weird that collectively a lot of people agree to seeing the same shadow figure in a top hat, trench coats, and piercing eyes. In that aspect, absolutely cool. That's the suspension of disbelief that I can absolutely get behind. People hallucinate, see this weird shadow figure, but the description keeps matching when you ask different people. And that's amazing. However, the more in-depth stories, they describe him talking in like a deep voice. Some of them describe him as helping them in some way. Some describe him as death himself, which is kind of not what I think it is, which honestly really disappointed me. I thought Hatman was one of my favorite supernatural cryptid-esque entities. And doing this research, he fell a lot of tiers. He went from like low A, high B tier down to like a C or D. Honestly, probably a high D. And not to say I got my hopes up of like, oh no, the shadowy figure isn't real. The one that you have to take tons of drugs to see wasn't real. Like, yeah, I get it. I know it's not this real entity that manifests into the world because you took 40 pills of Benadryl. I'm aware of that. However, the talk of stories about him got me really interested, and then I found those stories to be really hollow. This wasn't what I wanted this video to be about. This video really did change over the week and a half it took to make, because the Hatman isn't really a good conclusion to just say that it was a letdown in my opinion. So what do I want this video to really sum up to? How do I want it to really end? I think it's a fun meme. I love joking about it. I think it's funny that you just take a bunch of medicine and you show up in the shadow dimension. That's funny. I like it. Unfortunately, we can't have nice things and we can't have fun jokes because of the quote-unquote Benadryl challenge that has gotten popular from things like TikTok. You get people interested and they try to have an experience themselves. Right now it's about 3% of people who regularly take Diphenhydramine have overdosed and died completely. And you can read stories and hear experiences of other people's experiences, but in the end everyone has their own bodies and you never know how these chemicals are going to cause yours to react. Some have higher tolerances, some have lower. And in the end, taking 40 Benadryl pills just to see a shadowy figure and being on the verge of death is not worth it. And it's kind of ridiculous that I feel like this needs to be the end of the video because people do it and they don't realize the potential outcome it could have. I love having these memes, I love joking about this stuff, but when it comes down to it, at some point you have to give the warning, don't actually overdose. Don't misuse medication because you heard a funny story. Over the last few years, diphenhydramine misuse and overdoses have increased 230%. Now, this could be for a number of things, but personally, I do believe that internet culture has a great effect on it, especially with young people between ages 10 to 14. So, kind of ending on a somber note, but the Hatman isn't the scariest thing about diphenhydramine and Benadryl overdosing. Almost killing yourself is, and the lasting damage it can do to your brain. Because next thing you know, you do a fun challenge and you could be suffering from permanent psychosis. Please don't do it yourself. Leave the jokes and stories for the people that want to write Hatman fanfic headcanon shit. You don't need to add to it. I've read through a lot of it. It's already cursed. One more story isn't going to impact it. So yeah, don't trip on diphenhydramine or Benadryl. It's not worth it. I didn't even bring up the full list of symptoms. Have you heard of megacolon? It's exactly how it sounds. Your colon just gets bloated and huge. Like, it's crazy. If you want to see the Hatman, you gotta get a fat colon. This is not at all where I thought this video was gonna go. This is not at all what I thought it would be about. I really did just want to make a fun Hatman video, but it got darker the more research I did and the more serious I kind of realized it was. Especially since Hatman was really just a D tier supernatural entity, honestly. This movie better do some fucking carrying. If this movie doesn't bump him back up to B tier, I'm gonna be so upset because it looks hilarious. I know I put it on screen of this one section from the trailer where you just see this lizard man coming out of the closet. I gotta watch it. I gotta find where it's on. Anyways, yeah, not at all where I thought this video was going to be. I know it's a little all over the place, maybe a little clickbaity because of the thumbnail, but I thought of that thumbnail for so long I had to do it. It's so funny. I love it. You heard the stories. I've rambled on long enough about Benadryl and Hatman and hallucinating and all this other stuff. I kind of record these late at night because that's the only time I really can, so that's kind of why I'm rambling. I'm so tired. I don't think I'm going to keep that in the video. I don't know what I'm doing. I was really hoping for some cool Hatman stories, but instead I just found nothing substantial. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed these creep stories. Maybe you learned something. Maybe you just killed half an hour of your time. I don't know. Maybe you thought it was a complete waste of time. I'm open to hearing it all. Either way, you made it to the end, and I'm glad you found what I was saying interesting enough to stick around. So to that, thank you, and I hope to see you guys in a future video. I know I feel like every time I make a video I say, oh, it's been so long, I'm back, and then I go away again, but I'm gonna really try to be consistent this year, and I got a list of interesting topics. I even have a few scripts finished. We'll see what happens. I'm gonna try and keep these interesting random videos every 2 weeks or so. I'll still do the gaming stuff for those watching my Radius series. I'll come back to it. I got some other games I'm gonna play, and it stops me from going crazy from these more involved videos. I'll have some stuff in between, but every 2 weeks I'll try to have some interesting topic, and next one is gonna be wild. So thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.